Si usas la frase persona precavida vale por dos, the Colgate Total Active Prevention System is for you. Con una pasta dental reformulada, un cepillo de dientes innovador y un enjuague bucal antibacterial diseñados para trabajar juntos y ser 15 veces más eficaces al reducir el crecimiento de bacterias in just 6 weeks, starting from week 1. Compared to a non-antibacterial fluoride toothpaste and flat trim toothbrush, helping you prevent oral health problems like cavities and gingivitis before they start. Cómpralo en shop.colgate.com/total and be dentist ready.
Okay, only 10 more presents to wrap. You're almost at the finish line. But first... There, the last one. Enjoy a Coca-Cola for a pause that refreshes.
Hey everybody, this is the Brülosophy podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and we have made it to our 410th episode, which means it's time for another Brü A. Joining me to answer a bunch of listener-submitted questions is contributor Will Lovell.
Oh, every time we do these are some of my favorite episodes. The amount of questions we get are fantastic. The topics are all over the place. It makes me try to flex my brew knowledge and maybe even learn a thing or two more. So I'm really excited to be doing this today.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a reminder that one of the many benefits of being a patron of Brülosophy is that we do prioritize their questions for these Brü A episodes. So if there's something you've wanted to know, or perhaps you've emailed a question that we just haven't responded to yet, your best bet for getting it answered is to become a patron of Brülosophy. Now, real quick, this episode is dropping on December 30th, 2025, and as such, we want to make sure that everybody is having an excellent holiday season and that the new year treats you well. Sentimentalist that I am, I just can't help but look back and reflect on things a bit. And in doing so, it occurred to me that we used to do a sort of like annual wrap-up episode at the end of each year, during which we would go over all of the neat things that happened, as well as what we had planned for the future. But that feels a little weird this year, given the situation this industry is currently in. The truth is, we didn't really do much outside of our regular publishing schedule in 2025. And at this point, we don't really have any major developments to announce for the new year, for better or for worse. Now, keen listeners of this show will likely notice some changes in the coming weeks, namely to the ads in each episode. As some of our longtime sponsors have just been forced to pull out for budgetary reasons. We totally understand this. These are also friends of ours who we have nothing but appreciation and respect for. Now, I try to be as transparent as possible about these things, hence the focus on it right now. One thing that's absolutely true is that running even a relatively small outfit like Brülosophy costs money. And as much as some people believe that we should be doing this as some sort of a sacrifice, that's just not reality. It's not how it works. We all maintain regular jobs outside of Brülosophy and have been able to keep this thing going because of the revenue it generates itself. If the ads or my consistent mentions of ways that you can support us bothers you and you can't accept that you're getting all of this content for free, well, we are completely okay if you just ditch us. It's not our intention to bother you, but I hear from people weekly about how annoying it is that I talk about this stuff, or that they have to sit through, oh my God, a couple of minutes of ads per show. I'm not sure what else to say to those folks who find pleasure in whining about it, the way that we pay for this gig. Thankfully, we have a badass group of patrons who understand how all of this does work and really are doing their part to help us to keep it up. Trust me, a dream of mine would be able to drop all of the dynamic advertising and go back to having sponsors that we are friends with and that we could support in this industry. That's just not where we're at in these days. So if you're wondering what the hell a patron is, which I doubt because I talk about it so often, they are the amazing people who support us over at patreon.com/Brülosophy, where by making a small monthly pledge, anywhere from $1 to $15 per month, they receive rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique benefits benefits at YakimaValleyHops.com and an invitation to a monthly live Q&A or brew session with a contributor or friend of Brülosophy. Also, we've decided to prioritize questions submitted by patrons for these Brü A episodes, and since we made that decision earlier this year, every single question has come from a patron. It's not that we enjoy actively ignoring other listeners' questions, but rather we value our patrons enough to give them that benefit. Huge props to the many current patrons who stepped up to the plate and increased their pledges when we shared the news of some pending lost sponsorships last month. It was just the motivation we needed. If you're interested in learning more about the rewards you can get for supporting us in this way, you can head over to patreon.com/Brülosophy to check it out now. Another really easy way to support us is by using the links found at Brülosophy.com/support when you're shopping online. Your shopping experience doesn't change at all, and we get a little kickback for the referral. And finally, if you wouldn't mind, please take a few seconds to leave a rating and review of this show in Apple Podcast or wherever it is you listen to podcasts, as it helps those who may not be familiar with us to more easily find the show. Feedback is brought to you by Clawhammer Supply, who are known for their incredible all-in-one electric brewing systems. I've brewed on both their 120 and 240-volt systems, and I'm telling you, these things are awesome, efficient, easy to use with a relatively small footprint. You are not going to be disappointed with a Clawhammer unit. Plus, the folks behind the company run an amazing YouTube channel, which you can find by searching YouTube for Clawhammer Supply. If you're in the market for electric brewing gear or even just reasonably priced kettles and such, make sure to check out what Clawhammer Supply has to offer at clawhammersupply.com. And don't forget to let them know Brülosophy sent you when you're checking out. That's clawhammersupply.com. Patron and listener Tyson Sather wrote in with some feedback after listening to a previous Brü A episode. He said, I'm writing about some things that popped up in my mind after getting back into beer, brewing, and your podcast. I got back from a deployment roughly 6 to 7 months ago, but didn't start brewing again until a month ago. Oh, how things have changed. First off, the AHA stuff is crazy, but in hindsight, I guess I could have seen the drop coming, as I agree that getting a magazine doesn't feel like enough to justify the cost, and other membership perks were never really there. You can find the recipes in other places on the internet, and being a Brülosophy patron seems like a way better deal with the podcast, YVH discounts, and the Brü A's. Now, you guys discussed the Pinter recently, and I was wondering if you could share more of your thoughts on it. To me, it seems like an overpriced Mr. Beer kit with a subscription-based platform. Do you think products like this will help or harm homebrewing? Anyway, thanks for being the raddest podcast on the internet. Keep doing what you're doing. We will absolutely keep doing it, Tyson. Thank you so much for the feedback. What do you say, Will? What are your thoughts on what Tyson had to say about the state of homebrewing as well as the Pinter?
So, whenever I hosted a Brü A few weeks ago, one of our patrons was on there, and he made a pretty great comment, I thought, where he basically made the observation that, Brülosophy's here, and we have thousands of hours worth of information available at everyone's disposal basically for free. And this individual was kind of new to the hobby. He just kind of been diving in the last year or so. And he says that the ability to sit there and listen to these podcasts and catch up to speed on all this information just at your fingertips is absolutely amazing. And I have to agree, we have a really great library of information out there. Some of it's more tongue in cheek, some of it's more serious. But we have a great library out there of information and a great pool of people and resources inside of Brülosophy that have been homebrewing for quite a long time. And so I was very thankful to hear that feedback, because it kind of gives you a little more oomph to realize, we're keeping this thing going. It's pretty awesome that we can sit here and provide all this information to experienced and new brewers alike. And sadly, it does cost money. And thankfully, he also recognized that it's not free for you to keep hosting this website, to keep hosting all these things on YouTube, all these things on podcasts, and to keep hosting all this. And so I'm very thankful for his ability to recognize that as well. So, so Tyson, to you, and also the individual that, I was on my Brü A with a couple weeks ago. Thank you to all of our patrons. Thanks to all of you. So that's pretty awesome. As for Pinter, I would say that Pinter is interesting. I don't think that it hurts or harms. Yes, they do kind of want you to subscribe to their kits, and I saw that because I subscribed to get a deal for my neighbor and then kind of canceled the subscription. But I don't think there's any pressure to keep the subscription going if you don't want to. You can easily cancel it or pause it and start it back up. And to me, I don't know that I don't see how it could hurt the hobby.
Yeah.
Because again, it is a Mr. Beer Kit-ish kind of thing. The beers that I've had that my neighbor Curtis made were pretty awesome, actually. Like for what they were and the amount of time he put into them, and to have the one vessel that you're both doing the fermenting and serving in, I thought the beers that he made were pretty good, especially some of the darker beers. One of the IPAs he made, and I don't know if it's just the hop choice or the extract playing with the hops or something, was a little bit off about it. But again, for the amount of effort that he put into it, I thought it was really good for what it was. Not like world class, going to win gold medals at competitions good, but like pretty good for just a guy that's doing this, as kind of a side thing. So to me, I got it for him to kind of get into the hobby because he does like beer a lot, and he's kind of been interested in brewing. Will he take the next step? I don't know, but at least to give somebody a foot in the door with a reasonable method to get into it, similar to what Mr. Beer Kits did back in the day. And so I don't see a problem with it. Yeah, the subscription thing's a little annoying, but honestly, I've been through that process. It's not hard to cancel. So I don't see how it can hurt us. And honestly, we need anything that can help us along.
Yeah. Well, Tyson, first off, thank you so much for your support on Patreon. You are the reason we're here, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. And it's awesome to hear that you got back into homebrewing after so many months away. A lot of people give it up when they're separated for that long from a hobby, and you did not do that, and I love hearing that. As for the AHA stuff, I hear you, man, and I can't say that I entirely disagree. But what I will say is that given the changes to the organization and what I've heard about what's to come in the future, I am holding on to some hope that they can right the ship. Now, without getting into too much detail, I have been in contact with the new board and trust that they have, homebrewers' best intentions, which is a great start. I think my bigger concern is that things like the AHA, and not just the AHA, but associations in general, tend to appeal to older generations like ours will, which is part of the problem because I hate to put it this way, but we are dying out, right? That's just the reality of it. Homebrewing and really the brewing industry overall absolutely needs to figure out a way to tap into the younger generation. Otherwise, we're pretty much done for. And from what research I've actually done on this, the younger generation just doesn't see the value in paying to be a part of associations purely for the sake of supporting an industry. They want something tangible in return for their money. So what do? I don't know. That's the $1 million question. Perhaps a setup like Patreon where members get, monthly rewards in exchange for their membership would be more appealing. I mean, just like Tyson said, whatever little benefits the AHA previously offered when they were under the Brewers Association, I never even used them. I think I used the discount at More Beer like 3 times in the all of the years that I was a member of the AHA. It was great, don't get me wrong, but was that enough to justify the cost of membership? For me it was, obviously, but for a lot of people I just don't think it is. So again, I don't know what the answer is. The only thing I'm confident of at this point is that wrapping up the same gift in different paper isn't really the ticket, and I'm hopeful the AHA recognizes that. Now, as for your question about the Pinter, I've never used one, and based off what I've learned about them over the last year since we started talking about them on this show, I likely never will, or if I do, it's not going to be one that I own or that's in my house, but I think it can absolutely serve as a great gateway into homebrewing for some. And so for that reason, I'm glad they're around. I have no hate towards the Pinter. It's just not what I would get much meaning out of as a homebrewer. So thank you so much for being a patron, Tyson. I know that you asked a question that we're going to be getting to later in this episode. So we'll be doing that here in a minute. If you have show feedback, you could send it to feedback@brülosophy.com or leave us a note on social media. All right, don't forget to snag yourself some dope Brülosophy merch, which you can find at brülosophy.com/shop. We're offering more options than we ever have before. T-shirts, hoodies, hats, fanny packs, also known as bum bags, shorts, coffee mugs, tank tops, mobile phone cases, stickers, and more. We have done our best to keep prices as reasonable as possible, and international shipping is now available. Again, head over to brülosophy.com/shop and click one of the product images on that page, which will redirect you to our Dashery store, or you can go there directly, brülosophy.dashery.com. There's a link in the description of this episode to make it easy for you to do your shopping. This is yet another way you can help us out while getting something cool in return.
What's up? It's Big Loan from It's Up There Podcast. On this episode, we're unpacking the difference between toxic love and a real bond. How so many of us were taught to survive love instead of experiencing it. A lot of men think being solid means being silent. I'm good. I got it. That's the script we memorized before we even know ourselves. Because somewhere along the line, expression got labeled weakness. So now we perform composure while we're falling apart. You'll share your body, but not a conversation, and that's not intimacy. But what if being a man really means you care enough to communicate? Real love isn't loud, it's consistent. It's the small things, the small check-ins, the shared accountability, the honesty that feels awkward but keeps everyone safe. Stop confusing numbness with dependability. We got to break the cycle and break the pattern. This special episode of It's Up There podcast with Loon brought to you by Healthy Sexual from Gilead Sciences on the iHeart Radio app or wherever you get your podcast.
I've got Dan Morgan here on the pod. Say hi, Dan.
Hey, how's it going today?
It's going good, man. Tell us who you are and what you do.
I'm Dan Morgan. I'm an attorney and a managing partner at Morgan & Morgan, which is America's largest injury law firm.
That's pretty awesome. Why do you guys think you win so many cases?
The insurance companies and other companies that we go against know that we're going to take it to the end, that we believe in the case. So we fight for every dollar, and we're not afraid to go that extra mile for our clients.
Are insurance companies actually afraid of you guys?
We don't bluff. We take it to trial, and we are not strangers of getting very, very, very large verdicts.
Awesome. So how does someone get in contact with Morgan & Morgan? What would I do if I got into an accident?
Probably the easiest way is dialing pound law. That's pound 529 from your cell phone. Our call center is always waiting to take your call. 24/7, 365.
Wow. Dan Morgan from Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm. Thanks for coming by the show.
Thanks for having me.
Visit forthepeople.com for an office near you.
There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of wort, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today.
We all know that designing recipes is really fun, and doing it well is so much easier with good software. We at Brülosophy recently made the switch to Brewfather, and honestly, y'all, we could not be happier. Brewfather utilizes the latest technology to bring you the most robust cloud-based recipe design software that can be accessed anywhere, on your phone, tablet, desktop, and even offline. It also works seamlessly with numerous third-party devices to make it easier to monitor every step of your brew. I know change can be difficult, but trust me when I say you need to go to brewfather.app today to try it out for yourself. That's brewfather.app.
Huge thanks to all of our patrons who not only fund what it is we do here at Brülosophy, but submitted a bunch of great questions for this Brü A episode. The first one comes from Adrian Boley, who said, in your latest Short and Shoddy episode on Schwarzbier, you once again talked about cold side oxidation. I can see how important this is to you by how often you bring it up. I'm not set up to do pressurized transfers like you suggest, so instead I ferment in Fermonsters with a spigot, purge sanitizer out of a keg using CO2, connect a hose from the fermenter spigot to the liquid outpost of the keg, and release the CO2 through the pressure relief valve. Once the pressure is gone, I open the spigot and fill the keg. After the transfer, I purge the headspace of the keg with CO2 before moving it. I figure the only oxygen exposure I have is the beer at the top of the fermenter, and if I don't disturb or shake the fermenter, surface tension of the beer should minimize the exposure. What are your thoughts on this approach?
So, I understand not everyone has the gear to do a full-blown pressure transfer, and it sounds like you're trying to do a lot of things to mitigate it. I don't know that the surface tension of the beer is going to minimize the exposure that well. I've honestly just barely opened one of my keg bitters one time when I was doing a big IPA and had to fix I have a floating dip tube and it kind of fell off, and so I had to fix it. And just by opening it for a few seconds, even while running CO2 into the keg minter and reaffixing it, somehow that still got oxidized very quickly. So gases mix. And again, if it's probably just a blonde ale or a Schwarzbier, you can probably get away with it to some degree. If you're doing hazy IPA, good luck. So keep doing what you're doing. But what came to me whenever I read this question was that something, Marshall, that you actually did with the good old balloon lock. And that might be a good way to make sure that you're filling that headspace inside of your fermenter while things are pushing through with CO2 versus having, just air come in through the top of it. And so kind of the way the balloon lock works, which Marshall can probably speak to better than me, is you take a Mylar balloon, and before fermentation is done, you kind of affix it to the top of where your airlock would go, and then that fermentation CO2 is going to fill up that Mylar balloon, potentially eat any oxygen that you might have introduced during that time frame, and then again, as you're draining off your beer from your fermenter, the CO2 inside of that balloon will kind of offset the displacement that's going on inside of your fermenter. It does require a little bit of pressure, but I can't imagine it's that much pressure, since I think you were using that with carboys, weren't you, Marshall?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I was using, I kind of invented this idea of the balloon lock. God, what a dumb name. Specifically for what Adrian is asking about. I wanted to see if there was a way to capture naturally produced CO2 in a very rudimentary fashion that then would, when you're cold crashing or racking out of that fermenter, would just use that, kind of suck that CO2 back in, so that no oxygen is making its way into the fermenter during those transfers. So it worked really well for me. If you want, Adrian, you can hit me up and I can send you the article where I talk about making a balloon lock. It's very easy. You could figure it out yourself, I'm sure. But also, just to answer your question about your process, it sounds like it's probably pretty good. If you're making really hoppy beers, that's where I would have concern. Is, these hoppy beers are just so sensitive to oxygen, so much more so than other types or styles of beer, in my experience. So, you might be a little more careful there, but I don't think with your process, as long as you're going really gentle. And, most people, when they're transferring out of their fermenter, aren't transferring 100% of the liquid. If you're leaving, a couple inches of beer in the fermenter, ostensibly that would be the part of the beer that was exposed to the oxygen. So, everything else from that point forward, the way that you're managing your kegs and the purging process, I think is money. And so just keep doing that. But yeah, I think your process is 99% there. I would just be, for hoppy beers, a little concerned about, the top of that wort being exposed to oxygen. But I'm neurotic about cold side oxidation, as you pointed out. So
yeah, it's definitely not something you want to tangle with. Anyways, our next question comes from Johnny Taylor, and he says that based on what you guys discussed about hop stands and dry hopping on episode 407, would you agree that the best solution for most people is to just dry hop at yeast pitch and or dip hop, which involves making a hop slurry in the fermenter with wort at about 60 Celsius or 140 Fahrenheit before adding the rest of the cooled wort? What say you, Marshall?
I would never tell somebody what the best approach for their brewing is. That is just not in my nature. But what I will say is what I prefer doing nowadays. I always, if I'm dry hopping a beer, I always add those hops either at yeast pitch or during fermentation. I have never tried dip hopping. I like the idea. It's not terribly complex. It's not, you can kind of do your dip hop preparation while you're brewing. So it's not extending your brew day or anything like that. I've heard from people who say that it works really well. I don't do extended hop stands anymore. I'll make, late kettle editions or even flame out editions just because I might have extra hops that I really want to amplify the hop character of the beer. I'm all good with that, but I'm not chilling the wort down to 170 degrees, and letting it stand for 20 minutes. I just don't, for my, purposes, I don't see the point in that. It feels like a waste of time when dry hopping accomplishes basically the same thing without the risk of isomerization and increased bitterness, even if it's reduced, in that cooler wort for a hop stand. So I don't do hop stands, and I absolutely do see the benefit of adding dry hop additions, either during fermentation or even at yeast pitch. It just works. And I think it's a really neat way to avoid, to Adrian's question, to avoid cold side oxidation. If you are the type, who likes to add those dry hops once fermentation is complete, you are absolutely risking cold side oxidation. I want to avoid that at all costs. So that's what I do. I'm not going to tell other people what they should do or what would be best for them. But
yeah, I am kind of going to mostly echo what you just said. I think if you are really concerned about oxidation, especially if you're doing something like a hazy IPA and you want to try to get that biotransformation, whatever that is or means or whatever, then, dry hopping at yeast pitch is a pretty safe bet. And again, I like to also dry hop with a few points left in fermentation. I think that's also a pretty safe bet. And then beyond that, I actually have it's called a hop bong. It's something that Keglin makes. It's kind of like a plastic tube that you can use to dry hop beers, and it's got a little CO2 quick disconnect on it, so you can connect up your CO2 to it, kind of fill it and purge the space before you drop your dry hops in. And I've done that as well. But yeah, anything to keep that cold side oxidation out. And if dry hopping at yeast pitch is the best way, if I was going to do a hazy IPA tomorrow, I would probably do my dry hopping at yeast pitch just to avoid all that nasty confusion and nasty mess. And I'm kind of with you, Marshall. I haven't really dove too far into dip hopping. That would probably be something more that's in Jordan's space of expertise, since he is probably the hop head of Brülosophy more so than the rest of us. But but it sounds like a fun deal. But yeah, dry hop at yeast pitch away. Sounds great to me.
Yeah, give it a go. I mean, that's the thing about homebrewing is I promise you it's not going to ruin your batch. But the other thing about dry hopping at yeast pitch is if biotransformation is going to happen, by dry hopping at yeast pitch, you're taking advantage of that while also reducing the risk of cold side oxidation, which I think is awesome. So, all right, next question. This is a fun one. Comes from patron Andrew O, who says, on a recent trip to New York, while the girls were at a showing of Wicked, my 2-year-old and I settled into our Airbnb and found the King of the Hill reboot on Hulu. Episode 2 of the reboot, this is season 14, episode 2, is titled The Beer Story, and it centers around Hank's new hobby of homebrewing. Have you guys been able to watch this? If so, can you provide your professional critique? I thought it was entertaining and highlighted the differences in homebrewers, from beer-flavored beer people to all the various flavor avenues homebrewers can take, while bringing it home at the end with the theme of we're all in this hobby for the fun of it, and there's no wrong or right way. Maybe all we need to revitalize this hobby is a Megalo Mart and more Chuck Mangione with a little Snoop Dogg. What say you, Will?
I did love this episode. I thought it was fantastic to find Hank Hill combining his love of both propane and beer and combining them into one hobby, and I thought it was just a beautiful thing. And then somehow he had to get in a competition with his son about what is good beer. And then, although maybe the best scene is when they wind up at the Wild Armadillo Brewery and get a flight of beer, and he gets Cursed Hobbit Stout as one of his beers. Is it supposed to taste like medicine, Peggy? And that is literally like one of my favorite lines in the entire show. Oh my goodness! And you're like, I can just imagine. It reminds me of like the first time I served my parents like craft beer, and that's back when they kind of thought Shinerbach was bougie craft beer, and then you give them an IPA and they're like, is it supposed to taste like a pine cone in my mouth? What's going on here?
It is so fun. Look, I don't watch King of the Hill. I have nothing against it, but I've never watched a full episode. So this morning, before we're recording this on a Sunday, as we usually do, before we sat down to record, I found King of the Hill, season 14, episode 2, and I watched it. And I'm telling you, I might be a King of the Hill fan. It was so funny and just so relatable. Like you, one of my favorite scenes was when they're sitting in that Armadillo Brewery or whatever, and the beer tender comes out with a mustache and suspenders, and he just a total caricature of the stereotypical craft beer nerd. And Hank looks over to him and goes, "Hey, bartender," he says, "do you have a beer that's not trying to so hard to taste like something else?" And then this comment that when he's talking to his son about, your beer is just so basic and plain. And he says something like, "I have never wished that my beer tasted more fruity." If you haven't seen this episode, you have to go watch it as a home brewer. I feel like it's a rite of passage. It is so freaking funny. And also, to Andrew, I love the vision of you sitting in New York and watching King of the Hill with your 2-year-old, especially because in that episode also is the serving of near beer to the kids in the alley.
Right. Boomhauer, Lucas is drinking near beer in the alley. Are you going to let that happen?
It's so good. It's so good. And I love Chuck Mangione. You know, that song that you got a little taste of there just for a second. So good. Maybe all we need is a Megalomart and some more Chuck Mangione just to make this hobby a little bit better. But my critique, absolutely excellent episode. Thank you so much for bringing it to my attention, Andrew. I had just an absolute ball watching it this morning.
Yeah, and just to pull it all together, just like the end of the show when they compete against each other in that big homebrew competition in Dallas, that they both withdraw because the reality is that they had something that they loved and could have shared together, and instead they made it something that divided them. And that's kind of where we're at, right? We need to go back to our homebrew clubs and to our friends. And the guy that's making the beer-flavored beer, we got just as much space for him as the guy that's making the crazy sour pastry stout kind of thing, and the guy that's drinking his Miller Lite in his Lone Star in the corner. We got room for all of it. So we just all need to enjoy beer, enjoy this hobby, and just give it all a great big hug because it's all there, and we just need to enjoy it for what it is. So.
Absolutely.
The next question comes from Adam Bradley, although the King Hill question was amazing. I'm sorry, Adam, that you have to follow that up. He says, thank you for your honest, open communication about the loss of major business partners and supporters. How do you see Brülosophy changing in 2026 with the loss of revenue? And Marsha, I'm going to leave this one to you.
Yeah, it's a good question, Adam. And again, part of the reason that we include questions like this is because I just have this obsession with being as transparent as possible. I mentioned it. I mentioned it earlier, that some people seemingly love to complain about the stuff that makes this a business. And it's the fact that it's a business that it's still around today, right? How many podcasters do you know who put out 3 or 4 episodes and then never did it again? So that, but it has to pay for itself. Businesses do not, you cannot survive off of taking money from your family's budget, to do something fun like this. It has to survive on its own. And so the fact that we're losing these partners has been a very difficult thing on many levels for me. And I don't want to get too deep into this, but like I mentioned earlier, these are friends of ours. So they're running their own businesses, which, while arguably bigger than what it is we're doing here at Brülosophy, they're struggling to maintain as well. And I view that as it's just heartbreaking for me to see these people who, just 6-7 years ago were thriving because of this bubble that was just blowing up and brewing. Now, not even being able to pay what is arguably a relatively small, amount of money for us to sponsor them. Obviously, we're going to keep talking about them, but we have to make the business decisions. So some changes that you might see, the first one will be that there's going to be less non-dynamic ads, by which I mean ads that we record in-house and run for people that we support. And those are going to be filled for the time being with dynamic ads. So, a lot of people will hit me up and they're like, why did I hear an ad for, Viagra? That feels inappropriate for your show. Well, you were probably looking it up on Google because that's the way these ads get served up. And so they're going to advertise to you based on your interests in that way. Do I love it? No. Does it pay the bills? It does. And at this point, that's what we have to focus on. You will not see a change to the publishing schedule of Brülosophy, the Brülosophy podcast. At this point, we have no plans to change the current publishing schedule of Brülosophy.com. I have been talking with Martin about some potential changes to the Brülosophy show. There's nothing set in stone at this point. But when it does, you'll know about it. And chances are there might be some changes that have nothing to do with the financial side of the business, just, making changes for the sake of making changes to maybe make things easier for us. But that's really it. This, like I said earlier, it's not that things are terrible or in the gutter. We have to figure out a way to compensate for that lost revenue. And at this point, you guys, our patrons, are the ones who are doing that. I had somebody talking with me just a couple weeks ago, and they said, man, it was somebody who I was talking with about advertising stuff. We'll just put it that way. And they said, God, you've got so many viewers on your website, so many listeners to the podcast. I mean, this podcast gets over 150,000 listens a month. Okay. if every single one of those person threw $3 our way, we could drop all advertising. It would more than cover the cost of all the sponsorships, of all the dynamic ads and all of that. But people don't want to do it. I get that. It feels maybe meaningless when you can get it for free. So we have to find ways to pay for it. And that's how we're doing it. So again, if that bothers you, that's fine. It was free in the first place. You can stop listening, or you can just learn to deal with it. If you want us to stay around and you want to contribute to that, Patreon is the way to go at this point, because it's very difficult to find revenue under other rocks, as it were. So that's where it is. But Will, I mean, you can comment on it if you'd like as well. You've been around long enough to seen the changes over the years, particularly since COVID. It's just weird, right? It's something that we have to adapt to.
Yeah, and some of the sponsors we're losing, like they're companies that like I really love what they're providing us with, and I really love their products, and I'll keep talking about their stuff just because I was ordering, like for some of them, I was ordering their products before I was a contributor to Brülosophy, and I'll continue to use it if I don't have any other way of sponsored way to do it, just because they're such great people, great companies, and they provide such great products to us. And so again, I hope things turn around. I hope things are getting better, but right now I'm just hoping these companies, if cutting the sponsorship helps them get through a lean year and they can survive it, then I'm all for it. Let's get through this, and hopefully things will spin around and we can get back onto sunnier times.
Absolutely. And I'm hopeful that's exactly what's going to happen. Now, if anybody has any specific questions about this kind of stuff, feel free to drop us that question on Patreon, and we'll answer it as soon as possible. All right, we'll leave it at that. Next question comes from Snippets Be Free, who says, how do you achieve that beautiful red hue in beers? Ah, yes, a good brewing question. He says, I know there are quite a few recipes out there, but the SRM values are all over the place. I'm looking for a dead set formula that works.
So this one's a fun one, because I think the common wisdom, kind of when you read about it or when you think about it, you're like, oh, well, I've got to use Munich or Vienna or some kind of crystal malt. And yeah, those can give you kind of a reddish or a brown hue. But I think the real kind of cheat code, especially if you have like a lighter malt bill, is just to add a couple of ounces of something darker, like roasted barley or carafa, or just something, maybe an ounce or two in a 5-gallon batch, just to give it a little bit of color. Because honestly, that chocolate rye or carafa or roasted barley in a very small quantity will probably do more to get you to that red hue than a lot of adding caramel malts will, honestly.
Yeah, I love that red hue. I love Irish Red Ale. I love Red IPA. I'll be drinking some Celebration while watching football later today. For me, what has worked is exactly what you said, Will. Around 2% of roasted barley. Now, I think part of the SRM thing that came up, that Snippets Be Free was talking about, is because there are different types of roasted barley. If you're going with a UK roasted barley, that can be up where 500 degrees Levibon or north of that even, whereas the stuff from Brü is going to be closer to I believe it's like 350 degrees Levibon, so not as dark. They will both, in my experience, impart a nice red hue. But if you're using that American roasted barley that's less dark than the stuff from the UK, blending it with some like Crystal 40 or Crystal 60, just a little bit. I made a beer, Irish Red Ale, my go-to recipe, has 8 ounces of medium crystal, Simpson's medium crystal, with 2 ounces of Brü roasted barley. That's that lower roast stuff. And it is just a beautiful red hue that is ideal for the style, in my opinion. That'll work. If you're going for the darker stuff, probably, and you don't want to use crystal malt at all, just throw 2 ounces in a batch with other pale malts, and you are going to get a nice redness, a red color to that beer. That's been my experience, at least, and I feel like that's kind of the common go. Now, there's also products designed specifically to impart a red hue. I think it's called Cara Red, which is a caramel malt that is, again, specifically designed to make beer look more red. I've never used it, but I've had a lot of beers that are made with it. I had a friend who was on a Cara Red kick for a while. It works great. It tastes good. It is a little bit sweeter, obviously, than getting that red color from roasted barley. So just be careful with that.
Oh, and I remember like Chop and Brew, he was using like Red X or something. There was like a Red X malt that he was playing with too. I think that was another one that when you said Cara Red, that kind of triggered in my head for the Red X. So that may be another path to look at. But yeah, I'm kind of with you. Do a little bit of roasted barley, just a small little 1 or 2%. That ought to get you a little bit more of that color that you're looking for. So the next question comes from our friend Craig Frazier. He says, there's been a lot of questions about how to grow home brewing and reach new people, but what if that doesn't happen? What do you think home brewing will look like if it stays at the current numbers? What do you think will happen to the local and national retailers? Also, many suppliers and manufacturers, what do you think will happen to them? Lastly, if this does happen, which I hope it doesn't, how best can we continue on and enjoy our hobby to the maximum? Wow, it's the apocalypse coming at us, Marshall. What do you say?
Yeah, I think worst case scenario is we return to the days of yore. I mean, before craft beer really took off, people were homebrewing, in their kitchens. And I don't think we'll ever have to rely on the shitty ingredients that they had to rely on back then. I mean, we already have access to high quality malts. Those maltsters aren't going to go away. They just might not produce as much because people aren't buying it. Same with the hop growers. And I'm not sure about the yeast labs, but I'm sure that, White Labs and Y Yeast and Imperial are at least going to have offerings out there regardless of the nature of, this industry. I don't know. I mean, I could be wrong on that. So, I just think it would ultimately return to the way it used to be, which is, you got one homebrew shop every 200 miles. I would argue that with this situation that we're in, we're very fortunate to have online retailers who don't have to pay as much overhead, who don't, and this sounds horrible, but who don't have to pay, for the staffing of a storefront, all of that stuff. So they can offer reasonable prices and ship exactly what it is you want right to your door. Did that contribute to the fall of the local homebrew shop? Of course it did. And it's kind of one of those, 6 in one, half dozen in the other. You have to pick one. And we live in a modern world where people are shopping online, and that's just not going to change as much as we might try to preserve, the old school homebrew shops, which I love. I mean, we're lucky enough because we still have our local homebrew shop is running here in Fresno. But I hear from people all the time. You're going to hear from one later in this show whose local homebrew shop had to close up and they have nothing now and have to rely on online retailers. To me, that's the biggest thing, is access to quality ingredients. So I don't know if that is if it's ever going to go back to as bad as it was in the early days of homebrewing. I think we'll always have that. Sadly, I think you're going to see more or less people coming together in person to share the joy of brewing and beer. But again, we've got online groups, we've got the brew club, it's stuff like that, where at least you can tap into that community and get something meaningful out of it with others who share the same, joy of brewing and beer. So that's what I think. I don't think it's going to be, it's not going to blow up and go away forever. People are always going to be making beer, basically.
So, I've had similar conversations with other people. Just the other day, with Stephen Fisher, friend of Brülosophy, Patreon, really great guy. But we live in a time that we have great yeast, great malt, great gear, great hops, great hop products, all these things. Like, it is literally the best time to be in home brewing right now because we have so many amazing retailers out there that give us some of the best stuff that we can get our hands on. That, if people in the 90s and 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, they would be like thinking how great the yeast is right now compared to what it was in the early 2000s. I mean, it's just come night and day difference since when we started out. So honestly, this is like one of the greatest times to be in home brewing. So it's so weird to me that we're in such a decline as it is, because again, we have so many things at our disposal that are absolutely amazing. But kind of what you said, Marshall, people in the 90s and 80s, 90s, and early 2000s are brewing beer, and they seem to get along. Again, we're not going to see as many homebrew shops. It's probably going to be mostly online retailers to a hobbyist market. Maybe some of the stainless steel gear will either go up in cost or kind of go away as those things don't sell as much or it gets too costly to produce as demand decreases. So maybe a homage back to more DIY gear, maybe more fermenting the kegs. But, homebrewers are very resilient, and they always have been. They're pretty much the DIYers, or, what was the term they used a few years ago, crafters, kind of to the core. And so even if the decline continues, I have no doubt that the spark will be kept alive. I just think a lot of it's going to be moving to online retailers, online culture, online points of reference, and we'll get into some of that here in a little bit with another question. But I think that's where we're at. But honestly, though, we live in the greatest time ever to be homebrewers with all the stuff we have at our fingertips and our disposal and how reasonable a lot of it is. I mean, I have a glycol chiller in my garage, Marshall. Like that's
crazy.
You know what I mean? And it was like under $1,000. So honestly, like it's pretty amazing. But again, even if people come into the hobby and all we have is a 10-gallon pot and a paint strainer bag, like that's fine too. A strainer bag, that's fine too. You can still make great beer going either way. And so I just feel like it'll be different. My main concern is maybe we go back to dry yeast, but the dry yeasts available right now are pretty good, and I think that'll still continue. My concern is hopefully we keep getting really good hops. We've got some retailers out there like Yakima Valley Hops that have kind of treated homebrewers a little more upscale than some of the other hops that I always felt like we were just kind of getting what was left after the commercial guys got their hands on.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really hoping that we stay up with some of those things. But overall, we're a pretty great bunch of people. We're pretty resilient. I'm not worried about the hobby going away. It'll look a little different, but we're kind of going through some of these changes and growing pains right now anyway. So hopefully it comes out on the other side and things start looking way better.
Yeah, I'm hopeful. And as all things do, there's going to be an ebb and a flow. And, I'm already hearing from some people in the industry that it seems like there's a bit of a, kind of a correction going on or a stabilization going on. And usually when that happens, we start to see upticks. People start to get interested again. Again, I don't want to belabor this point, but we have to figure out a way to tap into people who aren't currently the stereotype of homebrewers, middle-aged white guys. I mean, that's just the truth. We have to get younger folks. We have to get people who aren't guys, right? We have to get girls involved in this. We have to get people who aren't white involved in this. And I think that is the only. And how do we make this look appealing to them? Again, I don't know, but I'll do whatever we can to do that. That's just kind of where my heart's at. So, all right, next question comes from Arthur Olcott, who says, I've been very intrigued by a number of pastry stouts that I've drunk this year, with Vault City arguably leading the charge here in the UK, with some amazing beers being released that often can only be described as, quote, liquid cake in a can. So for the coming year, I'd like to try my hand at some small batch pastry sours, and I understand I can get that low pH tartness with kettle souring. This is something I've never done, so I was wondering if you had any tips with the process, souring agent, etc., and what yeasts are generally good for these heavily fruited sour beers.
Oh man, pastry sours. So if you want to do fruited sours, I've done a few of those, but as far as like the pastry component, maybe you'll have to kind of go find your own way. But a great resource for anything sour, whether it's wild or quick kettle sour, whatever, is Milk the Funk. So I just want to put in a plug for them right up at the top because they have a great wiki with all the different things. But for a quick sour or a kettle sour, it's a pretty standard process, and I'll kind of go through what I would do for that, and then I would tell you what I'd actually do if I were in your shoes trying to do what you're doing, because they're kind of two related but different things. So if you're going to do a quick kettle sour, it's pretty simple. You're going to do your mash. Once the mash is over, you're going to bring that wort up to a boil in your brew kettle, then cool it back down to maybe around 100, 111 Fahrenheit. So what is that, 40 to 44 degrees C? And then that way you kind of like kill off whatever baddies might have been in that mash. And then you're going to go and you're going to pick out a lactic acid producing bacteria culture, whether that's going to be we used to use Goodbelly. I don't know what you have in the UK, but the carton Goodbelly no longer has Lactobacillus plantarum in it, but the capsules do. So you could use a probiotic kind of thing as long as it has a Lactobacillus strain. You could use a handful of uncrushed grain. I know Marshall's had some success doing that in the past, although that one's a little less controlled. Or you can go to someplace, I don't know what kind of yeast labs you have there, but I'm sure there's some funky culture lab like Bootleg Biology or Imperial that has over-the-counter lactic acid producing cultures that you could buy with all the bacteria in there that you need. And so you cool it down to that kind of 100 to 110 Fahrenheit, 40 to 44 degrees C kind of range. You inoculate that wort sitting there at that temperature with your bugs per se, and a lot of people cover up their like if I'm using my Delta all-in-ones to keep it at that 100 degrees or whatever, I would cover the top of it with plastic wrap just to kind of keep oxygen from getting in there. I know we've done some experiments with that where it doesn't matter, but it seems like you get less of a smell when you do it that way. So I would definitely put the plastic wrap on top of that. Doesn't cost you very much to put plastic wrap there. And then you just check on it and the pH every 12 hours with a pH meter, shooting for around a 3.2 to 3.3 pH, or just taste it along the way and see when it gets tart enough for you to do what you want to do. And then after that, you bring it back to a boil, add any hops if you like, add any adjuncts in the boil, cool it back off, put in a fermenter, and I would just go with whatever ale strain you like. I would probably use Chico strain because that's probably what I've done in the past. I think I've done Lutra in the past with the Kvike just to get it going faster with lack of temperature control in a garage at some point in time. So it's up to you. I've done some fruited sours with this, and I really like the results. But what I would actually do is kind of like what I did recently for an article where I did a short and shotty Lichtenhainer, which is not a pastry sour. Obviously, it's a smoked sour, but again, when you're just trying to get lactic acid flavor in there, I like to use sour VCA, which is a lactic acid producing yeast. And because sour VCA can create some really enamel peeling beers, I tend to co-pitch it with USO5. And so that way they're kind of competing with one another and you get the lactic acid, but you don't get quite to that enamel peeling level. And so that you just use your normal Brü A. And then for yeast, you're just co-pitching sour VCA and USO5 together. And that saves you that 24 to 36 hours of hanging out with a kettle at 100 degrees Fahrenheit, waiting for your thing to drop the pH down and get to the sour level that you're looking for. Again, that sour VCA co-pitch, that's something Mike Tonsmeyer let me on to a while back, and that's what I've been doing for the last several years. I've been really happy with getting that clean lactic acid flavor, similar to what a kettle quick sour would do.
Yeah, so I don't really like pastry stouts, and I really don't like pastry sours. So I'm not sure I'm the best one to respond to this, and I feel like you said everything that I would say anyways. So just so that I'm not being cheap on this, I have kettle soured before, like legit in the kettle soured. I wouldn't do it if I didn't have an electric system that can maintain the temperature of the wort wherever I set it to. I just think it's a little bit too difficult. I would just, like you said, I would use sour VCA or even co-pitch regular yeast with some sort of a lactic acid bacteria, because that works. I've done that several times as well. It works great. I really like the funkiness I get. I know a lot of people poo-poo this, but I like kettle souring with just, a handful of grains. I throw it into a hot bag that I've kept in sanitizer for a while just to make sure. Put some raw grain, uncrushed, toss it in there, throw it in 100-degree wort, let it sit for 24 hours, taste it. If it's sour enough, I bring it up to temp and call it a day, and then proceed with the brewing, as you would. It does taste different than if you're using just a isolated pure lactic acid bacteria. But I like that. I've made several Berliner Weisses that way, and it's kind of my preferred way to do it. Again, not everybody's favorite. So you'll have to try it out for yourself. Not very difficult though. I mean, I would imagine for a pastry sour that you would basically make the super sweet pastry stout and then just kettle sour it like we're talking about here, and then, boil it to kill the lactic acid bacteria, maybe add a little bit of hops, whatever it is you're looking for, and ferment it like normal. And in that case, I would use just a clean fermenting a relatively clean fermenting yeast, something like A09 Pub for a pastry sour, I think would work well. But, you could go with Chico. You could even ferment it with something like 3470, and I think, it would be nice and clean and crisp, really emphasize that sour and sweet combination.
Yeah, and I don't mean to say that you get the same results from using sour VCA and USO5 as you get from like using an actual lactic acid producing bacteria and doing the whole kettle sour thing. Because one of my favorite kettle sours I ever made was using Good Belly, which is just a probiotic that had Lactobacillus plantarum in it. And so honestly, that was a different taste than what I get with sour VCA. But for the sake of ease and the sake of not having to like hold that temperature for forever, I mean, even if you have an electric system, it still takes all those 2-3 days of monitoring it and checking on it. And then maybe you reach your target pH after a homebrew meeting. And so it's now 10 o'clock at night and you're staying up till midnight trying to get all this stuff done. Don't ask me why that's oddly specific, but yeah. So to me, like, it's just, if you're going to experiment and do things, like, it's just easier to experiment. And then once you get kind of your process down for making the pastry part of your sour, then maybe you can go over to maybe seeing about the funky side of your pastry sour and see where you go there. But totally up to you. So the next question comes from Roger E. And he says, when I brew a thin mash beer, like a lower gravity Pilsner or Blonde Ale, I find the mash efficiency is quite a bit higher than a thicker mash beer like an IPA. I'm wondering if others experience this as well, and if so, what are your thoughts on why? I'm using a 240-volt claw hammer system with tap water in Golden, British Columbia that is a pH of 7.8 to 8.
I don't think it has anything to do with your water in this case, because you're using the same water for both the thin mash and the thick mash beer, which I never actually thought about this in terms of the thickness of the mash. I always just thought about it as strength, right? The OG, lower gravity beers. And yes, absolutely, I experienced the same thing. I am the wrong person to ask as to why. I'm more of a practical or pragmatic brewer. So the fact that I recognize that this was very consistently happening, I would get 78% brewhouse efficiency when making anything under 1050 OG, but as soon as I start to creep up higher and higher, that efficiency goes down to the point where if I'm making a 1075 double IPA or something, I would expect on a normal full brew day, not a short and shoddy brew day, that's completely different. I would expect like 68% brewhouse efficiency, and I don't know why that is. It doesn't make sense to me why it would be different, but there are a lot of people that I've heard from who experience the same thing. So rather than worrying about it, my approach was just to set up two different or several. I think I have 4 different profiles in Brewfather that I use depending on the strength of the beer. So if I know, for example, if I'm going to make a Belgian Golden Strong Ale, I'm going to use my high gravity mash profile, which is set at 68% efficiency as opposed to 78% efficiency. Now, most people will tell you that can vary. I mean, you could brew the same batch side by side over and over. And even, we do that for a living over here at Brülosophy, and even we'll get slightly different OGs every once in a while. I'm not worried about that. I want to be in the ballpark though. And so that's why I do that. Is there a way, and I would imagine that if you extended the mash rest another 45 minutes or so, you might eke out a few more points of extract, but I really don't know. And for me, again, it's more practical to just adjust my the mash profile that I'm using in Brewfather, because what is it? An extra handful of grains or whatever that I'm losing, it doesn't bother me very much.
Yeah. So, the reason my understanding that this happens, because I have the Delta all-in-ones, which aren't exactly a clawhammer system, but it's all kind of that brew in a bag, brew in a basket kind of thing. And whenever you're adding more grain into that grain basket, you're actually, compressing your grain bed in there. And so you have less water coming in contact with as much grain because it's, again, a much thicker mash per se. And so to me, I'm the same way as Marshall. I have about 3 or 4 different profiles in Brewfather, and I just switch in between them, whether I'm doing a high gravity or lower gravity beer. And as long as I get in the ballpark. Now, one thing that I run into, especially if I'm doing like a Belgian Dark Strong or maybe something like an Imperial Stout, is that you do eventually get to a spot where you've reached the max capacity of your basket. And so like for things like a Belgian Dark Strong, it's appropriate to add sugar. Maybe I add an extra half pound or a pound of sugar, and then I get more fermentability that way anyways, and I can kind of take some grain out and subtract it and get a little better efficiency depending on how thick or thin my mash is at that point. For an Imperial Stout, I have no problem if I know I'm going to reach that kind of higher OG that's going to really just kind of mess with my efficiency. I have no problem designing in using just like some dry malt extract if I know that's going to save me some time and some energy. Some people will do reiterated mashing, where you kind of do 2 mashes back to back, and you can go. I think Chris Colby has a lot of literature on that because he kind of claims to be the inventor of that process, and you can go read what he has to say about that. But I never enjoyed doing 2 mashes back to back because that's like an extra hour of my life that I'll never get back. So so I don't go that route. So that's kind of my where I would leave it with that is like, yeah, you're compressing your grain bed, which is going to affect your efficiency. And you could either just create different profiles that account for that and get you in a better ballpark, or you can add some DME and reduce your grain bill, or you can add more sugar in the case of the Belgians. I've done all of those, including a reiterated mash, but I hated reiterated mashing, so I won't do that again.
Well, there you have it. And we have got a handful of questions that we still have yet to get to, but we need to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Brü A.
What's up? It's Big Loan from It's Up There podcast. On this episode, we're unpacking the difference between toxic love and a real bond. How so many of us were taught to survive love instead of experiencing it. A lot of men think being solid means being silent. I'm good. I got it. That's the script we memorized before we even know ourselves. Because somewhere along the line, expression got labeled weakness. So now we perform composure while we're falling apart. You'll share your body, but not a conversation, and that's not intimacy. But what if being a man really means you care enough to communicate? Real love isn't loud, it's consistent. It's the small things, the small check-ins, the shared accountability, the honesty that feels awkward but keeps everyone safe. Stop confusing numbness with dependability. We got to break the cycle and break the pattern. This special episode of It's Up There podcast with Loan brought to you by Healthy Sexual from Gilead Sciences on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcast.
I've got Dan Morgan here on the pod. Say hi, Dan.
Hey, how's it going today?
It's going good, man. Tell us who you are and what you do.
I'm Dan Morgan. I'm an attorney and a managing partner at Morgan & Morgan, which is America's largest injury law firm.
That's pretty awesome. Why do you guys think you win so many cases?
The insurance companies and other companies that we go against know that we're going to take it to the end, that we believe in the case. So we fight for every dollar, and we're not afraid to go that extra mile for our clients.
Are insurance companies actually afraid of you guys?
We don't bluff. We take it to trial, and we are not strangers of getting very, very, very large verdicts.
Awesome. So how does someone get in contact with Morgan & Morgan? What would I do if I got into an accident?
Probably the easiest way is dialing pound law. That's pound 529 from your cell phone. And our call center is always waiting to take your call. 24/7, 365.
Wow. Dan Morgan from Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm. Thanks for coming by the show.
Thanks for having me.
Visit forthepeople.com for an office near you.
Chilling work can be a chore, especially after a long brew day, but not with the Exhilarator Counterflow Chiller, which can chill a 5-gallon or 19-liter batch of wort in 5 minutes or less, leading to a strong cold break and clear wort in the fermenter. Brülosophy's Matt Del Fiacco uses the Exhilarator Max and absolutely loves it. In addition to improved chilling efficiency, every Exhilarator comes with a 5-year warranty that covers the entire chiller for manufacturer defects. If you're looking to up your chilling game and a CFC is right for you, head over to exhilarator.com today. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. All right, time to answer some more questions. Go ahead and kick us off, Will.
So we have Tyson Sather, who gave us a great question earlier in the show at the top of it, but he's back. So his first question of a two-parter is, what is Plato? And I don't mean the philosopher, Mr. Brülosophy there. And why is it used over specific gravity in pro-brewing?
Oh, Plato, he wrote The Republic. Haven't you read it? Yeah, most of us. No, I doubt most people have.
Influenced brewers everywhere.
Yeah. So, again, I don't want to come off as some hoity-toity expert. I had to do research to actually get the real answers to this, but I'm happy to do the research for you, Tyson. And it's a very... We could spend a long time talking about Plato and bricks and specific gravity. I don't want to do that. So to keep it as quick as possible, degrees Plato, which is how it's referred to as degrees Plato, is a scale for measuring the concentration of dissolved solids, primarily sugars, in wort, and it's expressed as a percent by weight. So 1 degree Plato is the same as 1 gram of extract. Again, that extract is mostly sugar, preferably fermentable sugar, per 100 grams of wort. So if you're at 1 degree Plato, you have 1 gram of extract per 1 gram of wort. Now, an easy way to make the transfer, to convert it to specific gravity, it's not always perfect, but until you get to higher gravities, it is pretty spot on if you use a calculator, is just to multiply the degrees Plato by 4, and you'll have your specific gravity. So for example, a 10 degree Plato wort is going to be 1040 specific gravity, or OG as well. A 12 degree Plato wort will be 1048 specific gravity. Again, it is just this ratio or this expression of the amount of extract that is in wort at 1 gram per 100 grams of wort. You look at specific gravity, that's the ratio of the wort density to water, the water density at a certain reference temperature. It's why we always do temperature corrections on our specific gravity readings. So why do commercial brewers use it? I think for some of them it's just easier. They're working in terms of like tons of grain, thousands of hectoliters of wort. They're not doing 5-gallon batches. So they measure grain by weight, wort by weight, sugar by weight, and they might as well measure alcohol yield by weight as well. So that makes sense to me. It's also just kind of the standard from when brewers were coming over from Europe. That's just what they settled on, was using degrees Plato. And so all of those brewers, that's how they're training the commercial brewers over here. I know commercial brewers who use specific gravity. Most of them, though, are using degrees Plato. So
yeah, that's pretty much my answers. The math's a little easier within Plato world because, again, you're doing percent extract by weight in the solution. So kind of my reference was 10 degrees Plato is roughly 10% extract by weight, which is pretty simple calculation there. Whereas, again, that specific gravity is the, weight of the extract versus with the whole volume of solution versus an equal volume of water, which is again kind of hard to explain, but roughly 1060 volume of wort. 1060 volume of wort is 6% heavier than the same volume of water, and so that math, 1060 versus 6%, it's not quite as nice, but it's a little messier than if you're just doing 10 degrees Plato. So second question, have you ever made rye sourdough, and what are some of your biggest sourdough tips?
Ooh, buddy.
Obviously made for you.
I love this question. Have I ever made rye sourdough? You kidding me? I made 2 loaves of saltskapmais just about a month ago for Thanksgiving with our family in Los Angeles. And it was delicious. I make that. Saltskapmais is a Latvian. It's a traditional Latvian bread. Saltskapmais just translates to sweet and sour bread, but it is a rye bread. Like a lot of Eastern Europeans, Latvians were heavy users of rye for bread and for other purposes as well. Rye flour is the only flour I've ever bought in a 50-pound bag. I still have a ton of it. And so when I make rye sourdough, I'm using the rye flour as a relatively small proportion of the total flour makeup of the grain, of the dough. So I've gone upwards of about 20% rye. The issue with rye is that it does create a denser bread, and my family tends to prefer fluffier sourdough bread. So I'll add 5%. So if I'm making a standard loaf, I'll add 25 grams of rye and then 475 grams of bread flour, and that will be like technically a rye bread. It contributes color, it contributes flavor. It has a very unique flavor. It is definitely not spicy like people like to talk about with rye beers, but it is. I love it. I like it just as much as I do my whole wheat. My whole wheat breads, where I add 5 to 10% of whole wheat flour. I go back and forth. I really do like it a lot. I use rye a ton in my sourdough making. Some of my biggest tips, it's going to be very similar to the tips I give people about brewing. The first one is this. In any hobby, there are going to be people who fancy themselves the expert, and then they somehow get people following them, and they gain some influence. And then they'll do something like make sourdough loaves that have these humongous holes in it. And yeah, it might look pretty, but we think it looks pretty because that's what's popular. I've made those types of loaves, and I hate them because, as pretty as it is, you can't put anything on the damn bread when you're slicing it, and it falls through. I don't see why people are so after that. To me, it's almost like the argument that you can't have a hazy beer because it's got to be pretty. Well, that's just vanity, and I may not like the way hazy IPA tastes as much as I do a nice, crisp, clean West Coast IPA. But I'm not saying one is, ultimately universally better than the other. Same thing with sourdough. And so my tip is make what works for you. If you're making loaves that have a tight crumb structure and not this big airy thing that can't hold butter or jam, and you like that, then you're winning. Don't worry about impressing people on the internet or whatever it is. That's my biggest tip. I actually intentionally make my loaves to look like a regular, for the crumb structure to look like a regular piece of bread, because it holds the stuff. I eat sourdough every day for breakfast with, eggs and whatever on it, and I don't want that stuff to fall through. So that's probably my biggest tip. The other one is that I found, this is a very specific one, but it is a tip that I've had to share 3 times with people that I've shared my sourdough starter with just in the last month alone. If your sourdough starter gets too acidic, it is not going to perform as well. At least that's been my experience. Meaning, I have a local friend here in town. I gave her some sourdough starter. She made some amazing loaves, loved it. And then for the last month and a half, every loaf she makes is falling flatter and flatter and flatter. And so what I shared with her was take, 5 grams of that starter, which is likely highly acidic, mix it with 50 grams each of flour and water, and do that twice a day for the next 3 days, and then use that starter. And what you're doing is you're propping up more of that yeast to outcompete some of that lactic acid bacteria so that it's less acidic. Every time I do that, the next loaf that I make is nice and fluffy. It has great oven spring, it's everything I want it to be. And so that's how I guess this is the tip, is that over the course of maybe 4 or 5 loaves, if I start to notice a change in the way those loaves are turning out, because they're more or less the same recipes, I will go and treat my starter differently. Now, I'm not the type of person who feeds my starter every day. I know some hardcore sourdough enthusiasts who do that. I pull it out a day or 2 before I'm going to use it. I feed it maybe once, maybe twice, and then I use that starter for a loaf, and that's been working very well for me. But those are my 2 biggest tips. Again, I know it sounds very similar to what I talk about with beer. So,
you sourdough supremacist. I mean, really, sometimes the best thing to go with bread is bread, Marshall. You don't need to put jam on it. You don't need to put any butter. Just bread-flavored bread is fine. But and similar to our conversation about King of the Hill, whether it's a tight proof or a bigger proof, we got room for all of it, brother. So just let it all come and hang out.
Amen.
Because I kind of like a big proof with all the big bubbles inside of it for some of it. But then, as you said, a tighter proof is sometimes really nice. But I will echo, though, legitimately the sourness. So my wife feeds her starter about once a week, and sometimes she'll make bread with like kind of fresh like discard from when she just fed it. A day or 2 after she just fed it, or she'll make it before she does the discard. And I've noticed that there's more acidity when the sourdough has not been fed more recently. And what I would have to say is it's probably maybe related to stress on your yeast and your culture, or maybe just something in there is out competing your yeast. And so my favorite sourdough loaves are the ones that she feeds the starter and then a day or 2 after makes the bread, because in my opinion, those make a bread that like you would not even know it's sourdough. And that's magical to me. Whereas like when it's sour, you're like, it's still fine. And some people are going for that, but it's just really all kind of preference. But Marshall, the sourdough supremacist, that's what we're going to go with. Brülosopher, sourdough supremacist, whatever.
My point is to say that just because you don't have a tight or you don't have an open crumb doesn't mean you're screwing up. Do what works for you. Like I said, just for kicks, I have made a wildly open crumb, high hydration, loaf of sourdough. It's fun to do. It's great. I prefer a tighter crumb. That doesn't mean I'm a bad sourdough baker. That's the point I'm trying to make. You do what you want. Don't be the supremacist, which you're referring to me as here.
I like that you call it crumb, though. Because I watch too much Bake Off, like Great British Baking Show, and Paula Hollywood's always calls it the proof, and so, with the bubbles inside, and so I like to call it the proof. And maybe I'm the snobbish one here, since I'm quoting British people for my sourdough.
All right, we're going to move past sourdough. Maybe it'll come back up later. Who knows?
I'll make it happen.
This question, you'll make it happen. Okay. This question comes from Jeremiah Pickard, who says, "What's your schedule for brewing seasonal beers? We're in midsummer. What are you brewing now for consumption later?" Midsummer, I guess they must live in the southern hemisphere. But what do you have a schedule for brewing seasonal beers?
I'd like to pair it with sourdough as frequently as possible, and I kind of structure it around that. No. I like to brew. I used to, back before the thing called Brülosophy, I probably did brew more seasonally. I remember like making, I have to have a stout. It's fall. I have to do this. And so I did kind of do like a fest. And so I did do a better job. But now I kind of have a few general things. Like it is nice to have a fest beer and Oktoberfest in the fall around that season, just because when friends come over during that time of year. But this year I didn't make one because I could get Oktoberfest and fest beer at every single brewery in town and on every store shelf. So I made something else because I had access to a lot of fest beer and Oktoberfest. So it didn't make any sense to me to do one this year just because I had so much of it, and I still have some in my fridge that was given to me that I need to go through. So I didn't do it this year. I do like to make bigger beers in winter. Nobody likes to drink that 13% barrel aged with coconut and ube stout that has more calories in a pint than a Big Mac does in the middle of summer. But in the winter, it can taste okay. And actually, I do have a stout on tap right now that I need to bottle because it is a 13% ABV barrel aged stout with coconut and ube that does have more calories in a pint than a Big Mac does. We did that as a club thing. I'll probably never do it again, but it was a lot of fun. But I do like Belgian Dark Strong and some of those in winter as well. And then in the summer, in almost any time of year, honestly. But I like to have Rauch beer around just to pair with some barbecue. I also like to drink Helles in the summer or a German Pils in summer. So I'll usually do something lighter like that in the summer. But again, I'm terrible at making this happen with any consistency. Most of my brewing schedule is around Brülosophy stuff. And so it doesn't seem to happen this way ever. But, the answer is if it pairs well with my wife's sourdough, then that's what I'm here for.
Okay, let's talk about sourdough again. No, I've said this before. I don't get into the whole seasonal brewing thing. I don't know if that's because I just like the beers that I prefer having on tap, I want to drink all year long anyways. I wish Celebration Ale was not annual. I wish it was always out there. I would drink it in the middle of summer. I would drink it in spring. I would drink it in fall. And of course, I'm drinking it in winter. The same with my brewing. I always want something crisp and easy to drink on tap. I like having something hoppy on tap. And I like having something a little bit different, whether that's a stout, a porter, maybe a sour beer. It could be a Hefeweizen or Weiss beer, but I'm not specifically going, all right, what is it that I'm brewing for the season? I know a lot of people really like to brew their Märzens for Oktoberfest in March. I think for tradition and the romanticism of that is fun. I don't find it appealing. It doesn't do, I would never let a beer lager that long intentionally, that's just not how I brew lagers. So I don't really think about what the season is when I'm approaching the beers that I'm choosing to brew. I'm hoping to have my brewery set up here in the next couple of months, and it will still be cold outside. Hopefully, by the time it gets set up, the first beer I'm brewing is either Tiny Bottom Pale Ale because I haven't had it in so long, or like a German Pils. I mean, just to have it on tap, So again, I'm not thinking about those things. I know that, or it makes sense to me that people who live in areas that have, like you and I actually have surprisingly similar climates where we live. You in San Antonio, me here in the Fresno area of California. It doesn't get that cold. Like we complain when it drops into the 50s here. So I don't need like a winter warmer, to warm me up. But I'll drink one. I'll make one. But I'll also make one in the middle of summer. It tastes just as good to me then. So that's my take on it. I know I'm probably unique in that perspective. So
yeah, the new label is Marshall Shot, Brülosopher, sourdough supremacist, killer of romanticism. Onward,
hates tradition,
tradition, killer of romanticism. Yep.
God, I sound awful. My God.
Get off your soapbox, you guy.
No shit.
Yeah.
I know.
All right, next one comes from, I'm going to go with Leaf. Leif, I think is how I'm going to pronounce it. I'm sorry for butchering your name, sir. Please don't withdraw your subscription from Patreon based off of name butchering. But he says, one day a beer tastes just okay. Then the next day is just about perfect. A couple of days later, it's got some off flavor, something weird going on. How does every day of the week make things taste different? I've wondered how this plays a part in judging a competition or even a short and shoddy. It's a real thing. Look it up. Is there a way to test this theory on beer? Could be a good excuse to drink for multiple days for science.
Yes. Well, it is a real thing, Leaf, and I know I am a psychologist in my real life, and one of the parts of psychology that I am the most interested in is perception and the subjectivity thereof. You've heard me say it a million times that preference is subjective. Well, when we're tasting a beer, that is pure subjectivity. Now, yes, you can look at the beer and say that is yellow. That's an objective observation. But the way you experience that beer, there is no way currently with the science that we have to prove that my experiences matches yours. It's the age-old trope of, how do I know that when I look at the sky and say it's blue, that what you're seeing and calling blue isn't actually perceived differently than what I'm perceiving? I feel it's the same way with beer. It's part of the reason that I don't feel like I'm the greatest judge, because I accept the subjectivity of judging, and I feel like most people who are submitting their beers and are really into the judging side are really convinced that there's an objective component to it. I am not. So this phenomenon that you're referring to, though, it is called the Provençal Rosé paradox. It just highlights how environmental context, things like social settings, a relaxed holiday mood, whatever it is, might boost our perceived enjoyment or the opposite of, right, of the flavor of something. Very, very well documented. This is a absolutely real phenomenon that I probably everyone listening to this show has experienced. It could be something as simple as, what you ate prior to drinking a beer. It could be something as amoebic as your mood, and I think that's fascinating. One of the weird things that I've experienced, and this one is insanely consistent for me, it doesn't matter if it's homebrew or commercial beer. If you take a beer, or let me speak for myself. If I take a beer, whether it's in the can or I pour it in a glass, whatever it is, and I'm standing in my shady garage and I'm sipping that beer, as soon as I step out of my garage and the sunlight hits me and I guess the beer, we're talking seconds, that beer tastes better to me. I don't know why, but it tastes better. Now, obviously, if I let that beer in a clear glass sit out there, you're going to get a little bit of skunking and it does not taste better. I'm not referring to that. There is something about being in sunshine and drinking a beer that makes it more enjoyable for me. I have to accept that that's what it is, because I don't believe that beer is changing in the quarter of a second that it took me to step from the shade into the sunshine. That just doesn't make sense. But that to me is a good example of this Provençal Rosé paradox. I love being in the sunshine. That is my happy space, right? We have been foggy as hell here where I live in the Fresno area for the last, 2 months now. Whenever the sun comes out, I'm outside, I'm in my backyard, cracking a beer because it tastes so much better, and just enjoying those moments. So you're not alone, Leaf. Everybody experiences this. I think it's one of the fascinating parts of the human condition, personally. If you're tasting off flavors one day and then you don't get it the next day, I can't speak to that, but it could just be that you're perceiving it as less tasty than you did in prior samplings, which makes sense.
I mean, there is a world where maybe you do have like oxidation happening or infection, but in general, I agree with you. There are certain beers. So if you take like a De Geer triple and you crack it open and pour me one, I don't care what day of the week it is, what time of year it is, I take a sip and it just takes me right back to my happy place in Bruges, Belgium, and I'm just like, I can just like totally just sit there and like just reminisce on that, and it's just subconsciously happening, and I can pick that beer out of a lineup, but it's such associated with happy memories for me that I love that beer, and it will forever be an amazing beer. Whether it is the most amazing beer ever or not, who knows, but to me it is, just because of that. So there is that. I will say there is one beer style that I think this does kind of happen with, and that's hazy IPA, because I do kind of feel like those things change very fast, not day to day, but more week to week, where like one week it tastes like, way too much hot burn. The next week it tastes pretty darn good, and then the week after that it tastes like a sickly mess. And so that can happen with some of those styles, but in general, I think your psychological answer was probably a little more on point than that.
Well, no, I mean, there is no denying that, if you made a hazy IPA, we'll just use that as the example, and you didn't, really mind your cold side oxidation, so it was exposed to a little bit of oxygen over time, that oxygen is gonna start having an impact. I mean, we have shown that over and over and over again. And it could be that you are tasting a very objectively different beer because of something like that. It's my nature to kind of think about more of the psychological side of it. And I just find, that perception piece of it so fascinating. The example that I gave was a beer that was beers that are made by commercial breweries, same case, same can, 2 seconds later tastes different. I mean, that to me is just a fascinating phenomenon. So hopefully we covered that question well enough. Next one comes from Mark Rose. This one's a bit longer. So if I have to take a couple of breaths, excuse me on that. Mark says, our local homebrew shop, the only one in Tucson, Arizona, just announced it'll be closing, leaving Tucson no shop at all. The nearest remaining shop is located in Phoenix. For our local club, this raises understandable concerns about both retaining current members and attracting new ones. Without a local shop, brewers lose access to hands-on advice, in-person mentorship, and the immediate availability of essential ingredients and equipment, elements that have traditionally been critical to sustaining and growing the hobby. For me, this moment forces a broader question. What changes does homebrewing need to make to adapt to a landscape where many brewers are effectively, quote, remote? And how can the community position itself to grow again when the tide eventually turns? How can homebrew clubs evolve to fill the gap left by local shops? Is there more to be done than sharing knowledge, peer mentorship, group buys, ingredient splits, equipment lending, and stronger ties with local breweries? What practical strategies can help experienced brewers stay engaged while still making the hobby accessible and welcoming to newcomers who not only have a physical starting point, who no longer have a physical starting point? I apologize. Finally, is there a role for national level organizations such as the AHA or other regional or online communities to help address this challenge? Whether through coordinated resources, education, advocacy, or new models of support, this feels like a pivotal moment for the future of homebrewing, as well as an opportunity to rethink how we sustain and grow the hobby in a changing environment. Obviously, this issue is one that is on the top of mind for a lot of people out there. We've already addressed it a little bit in this episode, but is there anything else you'd like to add, Will?
I think that is a very well thought out question, so I'll do my best to address at least a few points of it. I think it shows where Mark is and where a lot of us that have been around in the hobby a lot that value like in-person things. And you know, in the past, you know, probably when most of us got started, the amount of internet resources was low. There was probably like Homebrew Talk and the AHA and not a lot else. So you pretty much had to go to a local club or a homebrew shop to get information about things. It just wasn't very widely available. And so that's where he went. They kind of had the information and you'd buy a book or go to a club, and that was pretty much what you had to do. But I think that in this new world, that like if a young homebrewer is going to come on, they're going to go to YouTube like they do for everything else, and or TikTok, and that's where they're going to get that information. Like you don't need the homebrew shop now. And furthermore, a lot of these younger people, like socially, they're not as interested in in-person meetings or in-person things. And so they're going to order their stuff online, and then they're going to try to find communities that are more oriented around maybe Discord, maybe Facebook, maybe something a little more popular like Reddit. And you know, that said, I don't think there's not space for local clubs. I think there's plenty of space for local clubs. But I just think the best way to grow is to get, because I do think the best way to grow as a brewer is to get reliable feedback from people you trust, and you're going to meet most of those people at local brew clubs or beer shares, you know, those kinds of things. But that's something that we're not going to be able to force on others. And I think some people are just perfectly content to get their info from YouTube or wherever, and you know, and advocate with their friends instead of with other strangers that they don't know. They'd rather deal with strangers on the internet than strangers in real life, I guess. And that's just kind of a trend that's going on. As for national and regional level organizations influencing homebrewing, that's a really hard thing for me to speak to because I don't know exactly. But again, like with the Brew Club, we're creating a space online for people to come together and get information. What I think is really nice is we've got people like Dick Wallace. He lived in San Antonio for a while, and so we knew each other in person. But as he's moved on to now he lives in Colorado Springs, you know, we're still involved in the Brew Club together, even though he's not involved in my local club anymore. And so it's kind of one of those clubs too that you can take with you if you're moving around or going places. And I think that's a big thing. And so I think the biggest takeaway that I have for any of this is that we can't rest on what has always worked, and we can't just, you know, have faith that because brew shops exist, they'll always be there. We need to be kind of agile and willing to change and think outside the box when things don't work out the way that we think they should or the way they always should. And I think that's what we're seeing right now is just this kind of stress on home brewing as a whole and how we're having to kind of fit into a slightly different, maybe adjacent box than what we were fitting in the past. And I think that's just kind of where all this is going. I don't think it's good or bad. I just think it's going to be different.
Yeah. I'm going to use a little analog here. Think about I would say, majority perspective of homebrewers, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago when it came to brewing lager beers. The idea was that in order to make a lager, it wasn't a good lager. If you wanted to make a lager, one, you had to use lager yeast. Okay. You had to ferment it at 50 degrees Fahrenheit, give or take. That's 10 degrees C or so. You had to do an extended lagering phase. And what that led to was most people not brewing lagers at home. That's just a fact. And so that failure to embrace different approaches, and I'm not judging anyone for this, but that failure to do that failure to adapt and embrace led to people not doing it. When I think about homebrewing today, Mark asks, how can the community position itself to grow again when the tide eventually turns? We have to embrace modernity. As much as some of us codgers don't want to do that, as much as we might prefer in person, we have to accept that even if we think that's the better way, the people coming up behind us might not. And we have to be comfortable embracing what it is that works for them. If you keep fighting, you're going to fight yourself to the death. And I just don't see the point in that. If we keep trying to push things like, for example, Big Brew Day, awesome event, really cool for people in our age range because it meant that we could come together in person and brew these beers. The younger generation's not interested in that. I've heard from so many people in their 20s over the last 5 years who are like, yeah, I don't want to take the time to go out. I've got work, I've got kids, I've got all of this. That's not what interests me. What if posting a video or a live feed, for example, of a brew day and having other people join on is more appealing to those folks? I think that's how we have to start thinking about it. Let's tap into the younger generation and ask them, what do you want to see? What's going to work for you? Maybe as hard as it is for us to swallow this, maybe the local homebrew shop is old and we have to come up with some other way that works for the younger generation. Sometimes it hurts to accept reality. And in this case, we have to at least be open to it because the real reality right now is that it's not working. It's not working. The way things are isn't fucking working. And we have to do something to make it work. And if we keep sticking to our ways, just look at, what's happening in the world and you'll see that it doesn't work. And so again, that's my kind of high level take. I feel awful having these beliefs. I'll be honest. But I'm not going to be the guy who sits here and pretends that if we just stick to it, it'll eventually come back. That's not going to work. And I love this hobby way too much. I love this industry way too much to sit and just watch it fizzle out without at least trying to inject something different into it. I think that's part of the reason why I'm so comfortable talking about the fact I ferment lagers at 66 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 19C. I don't care if it bothers the traditionalists out there that I do that. I don't care that they brew it the way they want to either. But to me, that makes it more approachable to people who might want to brew lagers that way. We have to think about this hobby, this industry in that same way, I believe. That's my opinion, in order for us to get back on track and to welcome more people into it. Do I think I already addressed this in the feedback section of this show. Do I think organizations like the AHA, can help? Absolutely, but only if they open their eyes to different ways of doing things. If it's just a carbon copy of what they were doing before, it's not going to work. It's not working now. It didn't work. It led to where we're at today with the AHA, and let's do things differently. And I think that's the only way we're going to see progress in this.
Yeah, because sometimes the only consistent thing in all of your dissatisfying relationships is you. So it's time to recognize that.
Thank you, Dr. Will.
Yeah. Please come to me for more advice. It's like the King of the Hill thing. Like when I was younger, I don't know that I really appreciated Hank Hill, but as I've gotten older and more get off my lawn, I totally appreciate Hank Hill now. It's terrible.
Same with Homer. It used to be Bart. When you were a kid, it was Bart Simpson. You're like, that guy's so funny. Now it's like, God, I get where they're coming from now. Or Peter Griffin, same exact thing.
Yeah. You eventually become them. But yeah, eventually we have to make way for the new Barts. So it's okay.
That's right.
All right. So David Coons has a question. question. He says, what's your opinion of using nitrogen for dispensing stouts and other styles? For the cost of setting up a separate tap for a single style, is it worth the effort? I'm thinking about making the investment, but I'm not sure how often I would use it for anything other than the occasional stout.
Yeah, you and me both, David. I've been, I think I got my first kegerator, 16 years ago, and I've built 5 kegerator / keezers over the years. For myself, I've built several others for other friends, and I've never installed or had a nitrogen stout. But I love them. I think they're awesome. It just sounds way too much work for the occasional beer that I put on that I want served on nitro. Now, I would step outside of stout. I think every English style, including British Golden Ale, is great on nitro, but I still tend to prefer it on CO2 just because I like that sparkle. And so, like if I were to make let's say an Imperial Stout that I was serving on nitro or something, I would miss having it on regular CO2 because I would want both. And so since my preference leans into the sparkle you get from CO2, I just never saw the value in adding a nitrogen dispensing tap for myself. But I do have little tricks for when I want. I think I just talked about this on a recent episode. If I want something to emulate kind of that nitro pour, all you do is you get one of those children's medicine syringes. They're like 10 mils. I think the 20 mil one works a little bit better. You fill it you pour yourself like a 3/4 or less pint of beer that you want nitrogenated or whatever. You fill half of that syringe with beer, the rest with air, and then you just quickly blast it into the beer. You submerge the tip into the beer, and you just quickly depress the thing. And you'll see it cascades just like nitrogen. It throws out a lot of the CO2 that was in there, making it sparkly. It really contributes this nice, creamy, luscious mouthfeel. It works surprisingly well. And those medicine dispensers are free at pharmacies. You can go ask them for one and they'll give you one. So that's the way I get around it. Do I think they're awesome? In a perfect world, I'd have one, yes, but I just wouldn't use it. I kind of like you, David. I wouldn't use it enough to really justify the cost.
So it was like 10 years ago. I think Sam Adams had like a whole nitro series of beers that they came out with. Like they weren't around for very long. I don't even think they were around for a whole year. And they had a stout, they had an IPA, and the nitrogen just kind of seems to with the IPA, you had to like really increase the IBUs because like the nitrogen just kind of like is really creamy and kind of like washes it out a little bit if you don't. But I've contemplated it. One thing that kind of holds me back is that for beer, you're not using pure nitrogen, you're using beer gas. And the one thing that I would probably use it for more than beer would be to make like a coffee cold brew on a nitro system. And so like, to me, it's like, I'd rather go pure nitrogen because CO2 plus coffee kind of makes a not so great bitter acrid thing, and so it's not recommended. But so I kind of want to do 100% nitro, and I've read some people that instead of doing beer gas, they'll like initially carbonate it with CO2 and then switch over the nitrogen for the push, so that they can get that in there and still get that creaminess. And so I've thought about doing it just for the coffee, but seeing as how I've been thinking that for 5-6 years and I still haven't done it, it's probably not something I'm going to do. Maybe, but if the current trajectory it holds, it's not going to happen. But I do think it'd be cool. But I really want it. I think it'd be cool to do the occasional like Guinness stout clone because I do love Guinness. And I think it'd be amazing to have a nitro tap of Guinness around all the time, or like try it with, like you said, a nitro like a dark mild or something would be pretty awesome in my opinion.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, mostly I'd want it for coffee. So I'd probably have to do a pure nitro system and find some compromise of getting CO2 in there for carbonation and then pushing it with nitro.
Yeah. Try the medicine dispenser thing. It works shockingly well. It's a lot of fun. It looks cool. Just make sure you don't fill up your pint. You want to have a big glass because you're going to get a nice big creamy cap of foam that never goes away. It's really neat. So, all right. Next question comes from Bill Blakesley, who says, I recently switched to the Anvil Foundry Electric All-in-One after brewing with propane for over 10 years, and I've had a lot of trouble with the unit shutting off to prevent scorching, especially after a prolonged mash and or boil. The only option I've had is to transfer the boiling wort into stainless kegs so I can scrub the heating element, then reset the unit before dumping the hot wort back into the kettle to finish the brew day. That sounds awful, first off. Have you guys ever had anything similar happen with your electric rigs? And if so, how do you avoid or deal with it? Before answering, Will, another patron, Sasha Horowitz, who also uses the Anvil Foundry, did reply to Bill's question with encouragement to reach out to Anvil, which is owned by Blickman Engineering, as their customer support is apparently top-notch. I've never owned Blickman or Anvil gear, so I can't speak to it, but I have talked with John Blickman before. Nice guy, and I'm sure Sasha's right on point with that. So before Will, you answer, Bill, reach out to Anvil and see what they have to say about this. But have you ever dealt with anything like this with your Delta rigs?
So I've had 2 electric all-in-ones. I've had a Bruzilla 3.1, which is a little bit the older one, and then I now have the Delta all-in-ones. And on the Bruzilla, it was like I want to say they had a 1,000-watt switch for the 1,000-watt element, and then like a 500-watt switch, or maybe it was a 600-watt. I don't remember how many watts anymore. But you didn't have it at full blast going during the mash. Like you would like flip the 1,000-watt switch off during mashing. And same thing with the Delta all-in-ones. During mash, I can control how many watts of power I'm sending to my element, supposedly. And so if 1,800 is the max, and so I usually set it to about 700 or so when I'm actually doing my mash. I don't have it anywhere near the max. And so I don't have an experience with the Foundry, but my understanding is there's like a power percentage. So if you're at 100, I would knock that down to under 50% if you're scorching during your mash. That could explain why it's scorching. Also, I don't know. I don't think the Foundry comes by default with a way to recirculate your mash, but if you're recirculating your mash and things are going too fast, you could be sucking out your liquid faster than you can replenish it. So there's only like a thin layer of liquid. So if you're going too fast, that could potentially suck all that wort out from there, and you would just be really heating up this small amount of liquid really fast, and potentially cause scorching there as well. And so those are kind of the 2 things that my mind kind of went to, because on my pumps with the Bruzilla and the Delta all-in-one, it has a valve there, and I usually am only at about a quarter turn on that valve, open, just a quarter turn open, just because if you open it up all the way, it goes too fast, and then you'll start having scorching issues on the bottom. And so I kind of slow that down. I'm not trying to go full speed, I just slow it down so I'm less likely to get scorching. So those are kind of the 2 things where my mind went to that I would check first is, again, check the power, percentage of power you're using on your Foundry during mash. And it's possible that even if you don't air out during the mash and you're getting in the boil, it's possible that maybe enough stuff got on there during the mash that it didn't air out until you started really roasting in the boil. But I don't have that issue, so those are kind of where my mind goes.
Yeah, I've used several electric all-in-one systems. The SS Brewtech 240-volt systems. I have used several Clawhammer units, the 120 and the 240. The 240 is what I'm setting up. The 240-volt Clawhammer is what I'll be using in my new brewery here. I've used Grainfathers. I've used Bruzillas. I have never had this issue. Now, I'm sure you're not alone, Bill, but this is not something I've ever had to deal with. In part because, like you said, Will, all of the units that I use have variable, like you can set a percentage of power that goes to the element. So, for example, I'll just refer to the SS Brewtech because that's what I've brewed on the most. If I'm during the mash, first off, I'm also weird because I use my SS Brewtech and Clawhammers the Clawhammer has the basket, so that's basically like a bag. But the SS Brewtech, I do brew in a bag on it. And during the mash, I just turn off the element. I'm not worried about a couple points of temperature dropping. That doesn't bother me. I don't think it hurts the beer or anything like that. So I'll usually not even in the wintertime, I might come back and flip the element on just to get the heat back up halfway through the mash or whatever. But so that's probably contributing to the reason why I haven't experienced what Bill's talking about here. But also, whether I'm boiling or mashing or whatever, I just set the variable, the power that goes to the element on, whatever it needs to be that's low enough to not scorch, I guess. So I've never brewed on an Anvil Foundry. I believe we had a contributor many years ago, Matt Del Fiacco, who maybe was brewing on a Foundry for a minute. And I don't remember him talking about this. So again, Bill, it could be that you just have a lemon and maybe reach out to Anvil and ask them how to avoid this. They might give you some tips. They might replace your unit for you, something like that. So I don't know.
Yeah, when in doubt, if what I'm talking about makes no sense, then yeah, go contact Anvil. That is probably the best answer in this whole thing. So the last question, maybe even the last question of the year, because this is going to be the last podcast before the new year. So the last question of the year, even to make it even more dramatic, comes from Mike Z. Congrats, Mike. You're the last question of the year. It's for Marshall. You mentioned a trip to Europe recently and that you spent time in Prague, Czech Republic. Could you describe the other places you visited and your impressions of them? Because it's not like you have anybody on this call that lived in Europe or anything.
I was going to say, I'm not letting you off the hook.
So I'm going to let you. This is all you, Marshall. He said specifically you. So
I'm tossing it to you and I'm done, buddy. I've spent a considerable amount of time in Europe, actually. So I've been to Vienna, Austria. Awesome. I mean, I love travel. I feel like it's one of the reasons why I have the beliefs I do about the world, is because I've seen and experienced what I have in places that aren't the United States, the West Coast of the United States even. And so I love it. But yeah, Vienna, Austria, awesome. Went to the Sigmund Freud House. I'm a psychologist. You kind of have to do that. That was a lot of fun. God, I've been to Riga, Latvia twice now. Probably my favorite place on earth overall is Riga, Latvia, and that's coming from somebody who loves sunshine, and they're pretty far north up there. So I've never been in the winter. Who knows if I'll ever be there during the winter? And we will be going back in about a year and a half for the Song Festival. Let's see. I've been to Berlin. I've been to Munich, Germany. Both awesome. Had a fun time in Munich. We actually went to the Hofbrauhaus, big tent, and drank with some people who were at our hostel with us. This was back in 2003. It was the year before my wife and I got married. Just she and I went on a 5-week backpacking trip of Europe. And I don't know if I want to tell the whole story here, but woke up the next morning and saw that someone had defecated on my shoes off the top bunk in our hostel. It was a shared hostel room. And so that's one of the strongest memories I have of Munich, in addition to the delicious beer. I've been to Paris a couple times. We just got back from Paris with the kids back in April. Had an absolutely fantastic time there. I've been to Nice, France. That was fun. I got sunburned on the Mediterranean. Had a great time there. Let's see. Czech Republic. In terms of beer, that's probably, I don't know. London, England is a great place for beer. Ireland was excellent for beer, and Scotland. We only spent 2 days there, but their whiskey was some of the best I've ever had in my life. What I drank there. Let's see. God, I've been to a surprising amount of places. I've never been to Belgium, and that's something that will continue. You continue to make me very jealous about, in terms of the beer side of things. So that's definitely high on the list of places I want to go. I've only ever been to the Amsterdam airport, so I can't really speak to what it's like to hang out in Amsterdam. So that's we took the kids to Rome last year and had a great time there. They don't really. It's interesting. Italy doesn't have a very strong, at least as far as I could tell from our time in Rome, doesn't have a strong craft beer thing. But they do have some, and what I had was pretty great actually. But they're like standard Italian, mass market beers are all so good in my opinion. Peroni being one of them. When you have Peroni fresh off the tap in Italy, again, maybe it's just the experience of being in Italy, but it's amazing. Those are just some of the, I guess, top memories. I know there are other places I'm missing, but.
Well, I have been to Riga in winter, Marshall, so eat that. You're welcome.
Yeah,
man, I did that. That was the only time I went to Riga, Latvia, but it is a beautiful place. I'll echo that it's pretty awesome, and you should definitely go to Latvia. I think Croatia with its coastlines are beautiful. If you want beer drinking, I think Belgium is, other than maybe the Czech Republic and Prague and Munich, which you already mentioned, I think Belgium is the place to go. I kind of had if you had the month of September off, you could really do yourself some serious liver damage, because there's I think it's Bruges Beer Fest that happens in September, and I love Bruges. Bruges is maybe my favorite place on planet Earth. I love the canals, I love the beer, I love the chocolate shops, I love the ambiance, I just love how chill it is, and I love Belgium in general. I think Belgian beer is some of the most fun you can have. But in the same month, you could potentially hit Bad Dürkheim. Germany has Versmarkt, which is actually a wine fest. it translates to sausage market, but Bad Dürkheim Verstmarkt is a wine festival. It's the largest wine festival in Europe. You could potentially hit there. Then you could go hit Bruges Beer Fest in Belgium, and then you come back down to Munich for Oktoberfest towards the middle of September. And then at the end of September in Stuttgart, the second largest beer festival called Volksfest kicks on, and it's like a less touristy Oktoberfest. And so you're not getting all the big Munich breweries, but you are getting very lovely Stuttgart breweries, and Stuttgart knows how to make beer as well. And then the tents aren't quite as populated with tourists from other places. It's a lot more German feeling, which makes it very nice. So again, if you had the month of September that you could burn, that's how I would potentially burn it. But also Belgium, it's not a very large country. I think Brussels is cool, but maybe a little bit overrated. I like to spend more time in Ghent and Bruges. Amsterdam is pretty awesome. If you went there in the spring, you could go over to Keukenhof Gardens outside of Amsterdam and see the tulips. And when the tulips are going and the tulip fields are going, like, it's a very beautiful sight where you see all these different colors of tulips that you never knew you cared about. And I'm not a particularly flowery guy, but somehow I love tulips, partially because I was at Keukenhof Gardens in Amsterdam in the spring, outside of Amsterdam in the spring. And then inside of Amsterdam, you can go to the Heineken Museum, which is delicious. Like, fresh Heineken at the museum, no matter what you think of Heineken, fresh at the museum is at the brewery where they do the tour in the museum is delicious. It's fantastic. It's crisp. It's clean. It's everything that green bottle can't provide you after traveling overseas. And then there's other breweries there. I'm trying to. I couldn't spell this, but it's pronounced Brü A, and they have like a big ostrich, I think, is like one of their logos, and they do some kind of Belgian styles, and they sit right underneath a big windmill, so it's just a very nice experience, and just Amsterdam's lovely. There's lots of great food and lots of really cool people. I think the Dutch are probably more social and outgoing than some other cultures I've dealt with in Europe, and so I really like it there. If we're just gonna keep on a beer theme, then obviously England, going to London's a great place. Lots of pubs, lots of good stuff. But I had lots of good beer in Scotland as well. So you can drink your Scotch. You can go find little neighborhood pubs and drink beer there. I would highly recommend going to the Isle of Skye, a great place to go to an island where there are more sheep than people, which is always fun. They have ferry pools, and it's really cool to just go to these like the ferry pools are neat because everywhere in Scotland the water's stained by peat moss, so it's just kind of this brown coppery color. And so then all of a sudden you walk on these pools that are just crystal clear springs. And you're like, well, I could see where a bunch of people thought ferries made this because it's the only water around that isn't brown.
That's awesome.
And definitely, like, I like Italy. I love Italy. Like you said, the beer culture there isn't quite as strong, but lots of great wine. There's something about being in Florence in the middle of the Chianti region and eating Chianti beef, like a 2 kilo, like porterhouse ribeye kind of steak that you have to share with someone basically, and then drinking like Chianti wine. And so Chianti beef and Chianti wine, they pair very well together. Definitely hit that up. All the seafood there along the coast, it's amazing. The other place I really love is Spain. Barcelona is fantastic. If you've never been to Barcelona, again, it's more of a wine culture than it is a beer culture. But the wine is fantastic. The food's fantastic. The cured meats are fantastic. I also like southern Spain. So if you wanted to go over to Seville, Cordoba, that area, you can even make your way down to Gibraltar and hit some English pubs at the southern tip of Spain where it's still a part of England. It is kind of a weird cultural shift to go from staying someplace like Sevilla and then go over into Gibraltar where everybody kind of speaks English and it's a little bit of a different atmosphere. But Spain is lovely. Love it. You mentioned some parts of France. I never made it very far south in France, but the whole area along the German border in the Alsace-Lorraine area, like with Strasbourg, Nancy, Metz, Colmar, it's very beautiful. Parts of it feel more German than certain parts of Germany just because you still have the timbered houses. There is some beer there, also wine, lots of good food. So kind of up to you on what you want to do there. And then Germany, I think if you like beer, going to Cologne and drinking Kolsch, there's nothing quite like it. Drinking out of the little stangs that are just like tiny, and then having to remember how many of them you had at the end of the night and how you got to where you are is really hard because they're very small, and you just keep drinking them. And you're like, And you don't order one, you order like a tray of them, and then just the table goes through the tray and you order another tray. And you're like, okay, what tray are we on? Crap, what number am I on? I don't even know. And then you could work your way up to Dusseldorf and have the other famous Belgian ale of alt beer, which is also pretty fantastic. And there's so many spots outside of Bavaria to go to, but so many spots in Bavaria. You didn't mention one of my favorites, which is Bamberg. And it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site in the Old Town, so it's a very beautiful Old Town, and then you can go drink all the Rauch beer that you can stand, which for you may be none. But there are also other great breweries in the area. They have a great brewing culture there, and so it's not just Rauch beer, although that's what they're known for, and you'd be remiss not to go to Spezial and Schlenkerla, but you could go drink any number of things. And then probably the most picturesque fairy tale town in all of Germany is Rotenburg ob der Tauber, which is like a Christmas market town year round. It still has the medieval wall. It's pretty amazing, but those are all in Bavaria. And then, those are all great spots. And then France, northern France, going to Normandy in that area is pretty awesome, especially for World War II history and stuff like that. So, if you want a whole itinerary, tell me where you want to go. Hit me up. I can tell you all the really cool places I've been and all the really cool beers I've drank if I can remember. So, but yeah, Marshall, that's for you because I don't know much about Germany. So,
thank you for the tips. Only making all of us more jealous of your travels. Definitely, looking forward to traveling more in the future. We've got plans to go to the Caribbean with our kids next year, and looking forward to that. We did spend time in Jamaica, and really the only beer we drank there was Red Stripe, and a bunch of cocktails. Of course,
it's really good though. I'll drink Red Stripe all day, man.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Yeah. But I mean, God, if you have the ability to travel, do it. I appreciate the question, Mike. I feel like Will and I could just go on forever about the travel part of it and leave the beer even, to the side just because of the experiences of traveling. So that is all the time we've got for our 410th episode. We hope that all of you listening to this show have the happiest of New Year's and that 2026 brings, good health, good beer, and that you just have a great year. Thanks again to our amazing patrons for supporting us and submitting the questions for these episodes. We wouldn't be here without you. We are so appreciative of everything that you guys do for us, and these episodes are always such a blast, aren't they?
Dude, I love these. I said at the top of the show, I love these episodes. I love answering your questions. I love how thoughtful you all are and how amazing some of these questions are. And, just remember, whether traveling or in your own neighborhood, when in Rome, kind of, just act like a local for a little bit. If beer's not the thing and they got great tequila, then when in Rome, why not drink the tequila?
Amen, my friend. All right. If there's anything you'd like for us to address in a future Brü A episode, please consider becoming a patron, and we will almost certainly get to it. Plus, you get some pretty nifty stuff for your support as well. Don't forget to check out the Brülosophy Show, where host Martin Keane is creating some truly awesome content. You could find it at youtube.com/@thebrülosophy Show. And make sure to head to brülosophy.com to keep up on all of the fun beer and brewing stuff we are up to. The Brülosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brülosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brülosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brülosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go